Hello Year 5 and welcome to your reading lesson today. So today we're going to be looking at predictions because we've not done some prediction for a while and it's always quite good to do that at a really juicy part in our story. So we're going to look at making accurate predictions about what could happen next in our narrative. So as always, we're going to look at some rich vocabulary that's going to help you understand some parts of our story as I read through it. We're going to look at some of the different question styles in there as well. And then we're going to have a go at predicting what might happen next. And you're going to use evidence from the text to infer what motives a character might have. So what their intentions are for different parts of the story. So you'll understand that part when we get to the end of the part we're reading today. So let's have a look at some vocabulary. So on page 58 it says, moss-grown rock scarcely a pace away from him. So we're going to look at the word scarcely, and it's an adverb. Okay, so it's describing how something is or how something was done. That's two syllables, scarcely. And it means just before or hardly. Now, it's easy if I read that in a sentence too so it makes sense. So her voice was so low I could scarcely hear what she was saying. So if I now change that with my synonyms, it would be a voice was so low I could hardly hear, or I could barely hear, or only just hear what she was saying. So if I'm describing a rock being only a pace away from me, but being scarcely a pace, that tells me it's hardly even one step away from me. So it's telling me it's really, really close. Now the opposite of that is quite difficult in terms of antonyms, but it could be that something was adequately a pace away or sufficiently a pace away. So it would be described as being further away or harder for someone to hear. So scarcely is one of the words that's going to come up for us to look at on page 58. And then on 59, there's a sentence that says, he added in devoutly hushed tones. Now, we've looked at the word devoutly when we've looked in our RE topics, and being a devout Christian or being a devout Muslim or being a devout Buddhist would be that you have a strong connection or faith or commitment to your religion. But we're not going to be looking at devoutly in that context today. Okay, we're looking at it in a slightly different way. So it's three syllables, devoutly, and it's an adverb. It's describing how someone's doing something rather than someone being something, so it being a noun. So it means to be totally committed or to do something in a sincere manner. So let me put it into a sentence. So I devoutly hope you did not put your toys down the toilet. I can't tell you how many times I've heard my sister ask my nephew, who hasn't done it for a while now that he's 3.5, but before he had his 3rd birthday, he would shove anything down the toilet. And she would always say, I sincerely hope that you're not putting toys down the toilet. So I've just changed the word sincerely to devoutly. So it's when you have that total commitment or sincere or honest response to something where you really hope something isn't like that. So I earnestly hope that you didn't put toys down the toilet. I sincerely hope you didn't. Or I wholeheartedly hope that you didn't. So almost being sincere is almost being very honest, okay? So you could say, I severely hope that you did not put toys down the toilet. I earnestly hope. Now, the opposite of that would be to be quite devious or to be false. So almost not to be committed to something or not to say something to someone in a very sincere, very honest manner, okay? So that's another word that's going to pop up for us today to have a nosing, okay? So let's have a read of our work for today, okay? So we've got to the point where Firedrake, Ben and Sorrel, they've gone off on their journey and they've gone a little bit too far east because Sorrel has been very indignant, so she's dug her feet in and she's been really stubborn and has decided that she thinks that she knows best. Now, they're asleep at this point in time. Ben's awake, sun's come up. He's had a look at the map and he's realised they've gone way off course. So they've now stopped somewhere overnight where, according to Greytail's map, they shouldn't be. Okay, so we're going to find out what happens next. So you can have a read of your own and pause the video, or you can listen along with me. He opened it carefully and took the compass out of his pocket. Then he pulled out one of the dangling ribbons and had a close look at the mountains where they'd just landed. Next, he anxiously examined the entries made by the rat. Oh, wow, he murmured. I thought so. We've landed in one of those nasty yellow patches. We're far too east. I don't like this at all. So we know the yellow patches were the warning zones where Greytail told them not to go. And that's where Ben told Sorrel that that's where they ended up. She didn't believe him. But now he's double-checked the map, he knows why. And for good reason. Because suddenly there was a rustling sound behind him. Ben raised his head. There it was again. Perfectly clear. He turned around. Firedrake and Sorrel were still asleep. Only the tip of the dragon's tail twitched in his dreams. Ben looked around, feeling uneasy. Were there snakes in these mountains? Snakes were about the only thing he was really frightened of. Oh, come on, he thought. Probably just a rabbit. He folded the map, returned it to Sorrel's backpack, and Ben could hardly believe his eyes. A small fat man had emerged from behind a large moss-grown rock, scarcely a pace away from him. So this fat man's come out from this rock, quite literally right behind him. That's how close it is, because it was scarcely a pace away. This apparition, hardly bigger than a chicken, wore a huge hat on his head, which was as grey as the surrounding rocks, and he was also holding a pickaxe. Okay, so there could be a little bit of trouble that's about to stir here. No, it's not him, said the little man, looking Ben up and down. How do you know, Stonebeard? 3 more stout little fellows came out from behind the rock, so stout means small. Small and fat. They were inspecting Ben as if he was some strange animal which, to their astonishment, had landed on their mountain. Because our scouts wouldn't be prickling if he was, that's how I know, replied Stonebeard. This is a human being, can't you see that? Only a small one, though. The dwarf glanced in all directions, evidently. He even glanced up at the sky. Then, looking determined, he made for Ben, who was still crouching on the ground, bewildered. So bewildered, he's a bit shocked, he's a bit shell-shocked about what's going on, he's frozen. Stonebeard stood right in front of him, clutching the pickaxe in his little hands as if it would help him to face a giant human. His 3 companions stayed near the rock, watching their fearless leader with bated breath. You, human, whispered Stonebeard, tapping on Ben's knee. Who else is here with you? What, stammered Ben. The fat little man turned to his friends and tapped his forehead. A few teacups short of a full set, he informed them. So that means he thinks he's almost a little bit crazy. He thinks Ben's crazy. But I'll have another try. He turned back to Ben. Who else is here with you? He asked. An elf, a fairy, a brownie, a will-o'-the-wisp, or what? Without meaning to, Ben glanced swiftly at the place where Firedrake and Sorrel were sleeping. Ah! Stonebeard stepped to one side, stood on tiptoe, and gasped for breath, awestruck. His eyes were as round as marbles. He took off his huge hat, scratched his bald head, and put the hat back on. Hey, Ledengleam, Gravelbeard, Granite Face, he called. Come out from behind that rock. He added in devoutly hushed tones, You're never going to believe this. It's a dragon! A silver dragon! Slowly, still on tiptoe, he crept towards the sleeping Firedrake. His friends came hurrying after him in a state of high excitement. Here, wait a minute! Ben had finally recovered from his powers of speech. He jumped up and moved between Firedrake and the little men. They might not be much bigger than lemonade bottles, but all the same they raised their hammers and pickaxes and stared grimly at him. Make way there, human, growled Stonebeard. We only want to look at him. Sorrel, Ben called over his shoulder. Sorrel, wake up, there's a bunch of funny little men here. Funny little men? Stonebeard took a step towards Ben. Do you by any chance mean us? Did you hear that, brothers? What's all this racket? Grumbled Sorrel, yawning as she crawled out from behind the sleeping dragon. A forest brownie! Cried Ledengleam in alarm. Mountain dwarfs, said Sorrel. Well, fancy that. You're never safe from them anywhere. With one leap, she jumped in among the little men and picked up Ledengleam up by the collar. The dwarf dropped his hammer in alarm and kicked his crooked little legs in the air. His friends instantly made for Sorrel, but the brownie girl effortlessly fended them off with her free paw. So effortlessly, she did it quite easily, because don't forget, she's a lot bigger than them and she just flicks them away like flies. No need to get all worked up, she said, relieving the dwarfs of their hammers and pickaxes and chucking them over her shoulder. Don't you know you must never wake up a dragon? Suppose he'd eaten you for breakfast. You look really juicy. Nice and crunchy too. Huh! Silly brownie talk, said Stonebeard, scowling at Sorrel. But even so, he took 2 tiny steps backwards, just to be on the safe side. Dragons don't eat anything that breathes, said the fattest dwarf, taking cover behind a rock. They live on moonlight, and all their strength comes from the moon. They can't even fly when it isn't shining. Oh, very clever, aren't you? Sorrel put the struggling leaden Gleam back on the grass and leaned over the others. So tell me, how you knew we were here? Have we been stupid enough to land right on your doorstep? The four of them looked anxiously at her. Stonebeard nudged the smallest of them. Go on, Granite Face, he growled. Your turn now. Granite Face stepped forward hesitantly, fingered the brim of his hat, and looked uneasily up at the two giant figures facing him. No, he said at last, his voice trembling. We live a good way further up the mountain, but our scalps were prickling this morning. Usually they only do that when we're near the castle. And what does that mean? Asked Sorrel impatiently. Our scalps prickle when there are other fabulous beings somewhere near, replied Granite Face. Humans and animals don't have the same effect. Which is lucky, sighed Leadingham Gleam. Sorrel looked suspiciously at the four of them. You said something about a castle just now. Ben knelt down in front of Granite Face and looked inquiringly at him. Do you mean that castle up there? He asked. We don't know anything, called the fattest dwarf behind the rock. Not a thing. Shut up, Gravelbeard, said Stonebeard. Granite Face looked at Ben like a frightened rabbit and hastily retreated to the others. Now, we've looked at retreated, they've moved backwards, they've taken a few steps back. But Stonebeard took a step forward towards the human boy. Yes, that's the castle we mean, he grunted. It makes our scalps prickle so hard it's unbelievable, unbearable. That's why we haven't been there for years. Even though the mountain where it stands has such a strong smell of gold, it's enough to lift the hat off your head. Ben and Sorrel looked up at the castle. Who lives there then? Asked Ben, not liking the sound of this. And I'm going to be really mean. I'm going to pause it right there. So we're going to have a look at some of our questions. Then you are going to have a go at predicting what's going to happen next. And I fear, or I believe, it's going to get quite juicy. So let's have a look at some questions.